welcome. Thanks for tuning in. This is the second half of a dialogue that initially started as the last upload on my channel, which started off with Chris, Daniel, and I, and then Chris had to leave after the first hour, and so then we just shifted it to just a dialogue with Daniel and I, where we go into and pull up the video of a conversation that Daniel and John Vervaeke had on essentially Eidos, the notion of platonic Eidos. And this, some of John's arguments about this and what he's trying to unpack here, I think gets to the very, very heart of the matter, and virtually everything to do with anything that involves intelligibility or being. So it's like it goes right to the heart of it. So I imagine this will be the first of a number of videos coming up where we discuss this much more deeply. But there's been some, you could say, over the years, since Plato, over the last 2,000 years, right, the notion of the Platonic form is something it's been controversial. It's been some people talk about it like they deny it, or they think it's bogus, or there's a notion of like that the forms are in a Platonic heaven of some sort. However, the thing that John encouraged, which was a big insight for me, is that the problem with the word Platonic form is that usually when people think of form, they see a shape in their mind. And that actually does not get at it. So if you could think about the Platonic forms or the Eidos and let go of the notion of it being a physical shape, when you do that, a whole new thing opens up. And that new thing that opens up, I believe, is where the meat of the distinction is. So we go around and around and go pretty deep into this topic, and it felt like we were just began. So I really hope you enjoy it. I look forward to your comments. Of course, you can, if you're not, if you want to get updates for all these videos, become whatever. Click the button down below. And for some housekeeping, all the information for circling are provided below in the links. We will be also having another Circling Dialogos weekend course. We did our first one a while back, and it was beyond our expectations. And so we're going to keep doing them. So when we have the dates firmed down and it's ready to register, I will let you know about that. So keep your ears open for that. All right. Thank you. Oh, also, if you're interested in working with me one-on-one, my email is below. Just email me. Okay, bye-bye. All right, so now we're going to just go ahead and I think I got it in the beginning of the part of just where John summarizes what the conversation. Well, you've had one, obviously, that we're watching. I've had one. He's had one with Jordan as well about this sense of eidetic eduction. So let's go ahead and press play.
JP Marceau, Jordan Hall, and Guy Sengstock on your project of eidetic eduction.
Yeah.
It's kind of like what Nishitani is kind of like talking all the time. And one Kyoto School scholar, John Crummell, characterizes Nishitani even as having an ontological position, which means that the thing is always beyond, it's inexhaustible, beyond exhaustion. It can never be captured by any way of reification that we want to put on it. It's always burst, like the aspects are always exploding, bursting through into the monas, to say. And maybe you can talk about how we can educe that kind of like those trans aspectual
Yeah.
aspect of,
Yeah.
of the thing. Because when we did this Dialogos course with Chris and Guy and you, I had this wonderful moment where not let's say with even not with an object, but let's even say with like an idea or virtue. Let's say with so we did this, that we circled around, let's say, a virtue. I did it once, then in a private group we did it with filial love.
Yeah.
And we kind of like, right, there's this, even with non-object, let's say, you see that there is almost an inexhaustibility to them.
Yes.
When you do the eduction, and when you do the dialogic, when you do the dialogical eduction.
Yeah. I'm glad you're seeing that, because the part of the argument I'm working towards, I was working with Jordan and with Guy, was the deep interconnections between dialogos and eidetic eduction, trying to get clearer about how the Philia and the Sophia come together, if you'll allow me that. One of the things I was trying to do with that, especially with, because I explicitly told Jordan and Guy about it, is I wanted to show both within dialogue and between dialogues, I was trying to exemplify, right, the very thing I was trying to talk about, and try. I'm experimenting a lot with the medium and the format, and how can we use it to enrich our philosophical practice. And so I'm glad you picked up on that, because that was the intent, in fact, of even doing the sequence. I want to do that again with other things. The idea is, this came out of work I've been doing with Dan Chiappi, my co-author, on a bunch of papers. We've released a couple of recent ones. We have another one coming out soon. And we were reading very carefully Schindler's book, Plato's Critique of Impure Reason. And then we've been reading, we reread together Merleau-Ponty's preface to the Phenomenology, and we're going through John Russin's work on Bearing Witness to Epiphany. And so Russin and Schindler are like doing this to me, especially about the idea of integrating phenomenology and Platonism together. Now, the problem for that, for many people, with a philosophical background, is post Heidegger, these are often seen as somehow oppositional to each other. But if you look at Husserl, it's clear that they were meant to be very closely. Husserl's using all this Platonic language all the way through his attempt to articulate what's going on in phenomenology, because I think he was engaged in a project very similar to Plato's, which is trying to explicate. I don't have quite the right noun. I want to say something other than process, but the process of intelligibility, and trying to disclose that. And so I've been thinking about, well, what might that look like? Informed by the work I've been doing and some of the stuff from object-oriented ontology and the work I've been doing with Dan and Guy and Jordan, and then try to work out what that would look like as a practice that I've come to call eidetic eduction. And the basic idea of it is, you can see it's a variation, maybe even an exaptation of Husserl's, eidetic reduction and things like that. But the basic idea is this: I was trying to come up with a new, maybe an old way of understanding what a Platonic Eidos is, a form, and get away from being bound to the shape metaphor that we've been sort of bound into by the term form for the Eidos. And the fact that Eidos actually translate originally more like something like the look of something made me think, oh, wait. And this made me think of both Heidegger, but especially of Wittgenstein and aspect shifting and all the work from Gestalt psychology and all the work I do on insight. And I was thinking, well, and then of course in Husserl's phenomenology is any object, anything that we think of as an object, right? So here's my jackknife, right? And right, it has there, you never actually. And this is one of, Husserl often says these things that are sort of simultaneously obvious and profound, which is you never see the object, right? You always only see an aspect of it because you can't get the simultaneity of multi-perspectival of all the possible, even spatial aspects of it, let alone the functional aspects. I can use this as a knife. I can use this as a measuring weapon. I can use this to stand for the letter I. I can, right? So you have multi-aspectuality, right? And that, of course, lines up with the work I do in CogSci about how every object is combinatorially explosive in the amount of information, which is relations it can bear within itself and to other things. But the thing that was getting to me, but Plato was trying to do something with this notion of the looks, all the aspects, and he's trying to say something about, but the eidos is itself not perceptual, right? It's somehow
anything you want to
how transperceptual, and then I realized, well,
anything you want to say.
Yeah, apart from that, I don't like my dialect when I hear it. It sounds too German.
Too
It's almost right. I'm not thinking about voices, right? And like voices are good examples of this, right? You can never, right? You can never perceptually, right? I mean, right? We fall into the illusion, maybe, right? And okay, I can grasp this glass, and I have it in my totality, in my full grasp, and right. This is a danger that Heidegger, for example,
right there, you just sounded like Arnold Schwarzenegger. I have it in my totality, with full grasp.
Oh no!
Schwarzenegger.
A friend, like, when was this? When I was in Japan, I hung out with some. I don't know. She was from Australia and she loved Schwarzenegger movies. And I said, stupid, and she was bursting out with laughter because Schwarzenegger also says it like this. Yes. In this very horrible way, and I said it at this time also in this way, not stupid, but stupid, and she was just like she was lying on the floor, so to say. Okay. Heidegger White was talking in the dialogue with the Japanese. He was talking about this, right? We can, and they talk about in the context of aesthetics, right? But there's this danger that we can have with certain phenomena. Let's say they were talking about Iki in that, right, in the dialogue, this aesthetic phenomenon, and then we have all these concepts, right? That we are given by metaphysics and just by philosophy, and then we can grasp it, right? This thing, this phenomenon, right, called Iki, and we can grasp it, and then we think we possess it, right? Yeah. And then we do this with all sorts of things, right? Language, we think, right? Language and maybe Sprache or kotoba in Japanese, right? These are all identical things, and right, because we can grasp them with the definitions and concepts we have. Thinking about something like a voice, for example, which is a very weird, not an object, right? But let's say a phenomenon. Right? Even when you try to describe a voice, you can't. There's something very distinct about it. There's a certain suchness to it, but try to describe it. and you see how explosive, right, this phenomenon itself is. And I think, right, like the Japanese language, for example, is very good at this because it can express all sorts of levels of tone and mood and feeling that you right, with you can perceive a phenomenon. And when we try to practice, right, then we see this, but think about, right, when we do it to an object, let's say this grasping, then okay, that particular being won't. I mean, it's right. Heidegger would say it withdraws sense. Sense withholds itself. Sense stays away. But let's just say it in the practice of dialogos, right? When you do this grasping with, let's say, a person, we hate this, right? When we make assumptions about other people, you are this, you are that. So we have to, right? We have to learn in the practice that we withhold, right? We practice releasement, and we learn that a thing can turn itself in its selfness or in its suchness, but that implies that we do not reduce it to any of its aspects. So, and I think that's how eidetic induction and dialogos are really.
I want to go back just that again. It was really important what you just said. So, just the thing about, instead of labeling or controlling or summing something up or grasping at something, right? We hate that, especially when it's towards somebody else. Instead, that part. You're talking about, what I heard you say was to, in some sense, to find yourself in comporting, right? You, the cup, the other person, right? The mountain, in such a way that, well, glass night you let be, right? And you said something really important I want to highlight. And that, what that requires is to not grasp on to any one of its aspects, but to actually, I got this picture of literally all my hands, just my whole hand opened up, right?
Yeah, that's a wonderful image for this, right?
Yeah.
We right, again, we do not reduce the other to a particular identity, but we let the other be with the whole range of possibility, with the trans-aspectual moreness, with that whole inexhaustible moreness. We let the other be. We have to learn not to hold or cling onto just one or a few particular aspects.
Yeah.
And right, loving to love comes from there is an etymological relationship to what is this in English? Making something light, right? Not light in saying like the light from the sun also, but light in the sense a lightweight.
Yeah, like the weight, like less weight.
Yeah, lightweight. Something is light, and then there is this. So we have to let this lightness, so to say, just be. This is kind of like what we need to learn.
This is really delicate. There's a delicacy, right? There's something really delicate about this. Yeah. So this way of, you could say, the proper attuned comportment, right? With an attunement, I would say, with that which I'm before is Eidos, the Eidos of that which I'm before, whether it be a person or a cup, right, or an event, that to let it be, right, really requires me to not grasp on to any one of its aspects, but like open hand, right? Kind of you want to talk about in terms of attention, like an allowing attention, right?
Yeah.
Right. Like in some sense, it's like it's weird to think about it like this, but I think this makes sense. It's like, I want what's happening, right? I want everything to happen that's going to happen. I want it to happen as it happens, right? Versus which would be an aspect, right? Something about that allows the eidos to unfold, right? And gather in all the aspects, right? That there's something about that way of being, way of comporting oneself in the world that that attunement is just really, it's just really loud to me right here, because there's a mutual attunement going on. Because it seems to me that, well, what is it that I already have in view that's already underway, such that I would be inclined to not grasp hold of one of its parts and, crave it, or in that kind of neurotic sense of the word, hold on to something, right?
Yeah.
What do I already have in view such that I would just comport myself in that way before that which I'm addressing and being addressed by, right?
What comes to my mind is when we said, right, with the hand, right? Heidegger has a lecture course, right? Introduction to Philosophy, which is not yet published in
It's
English.
nice of him. Nice of him to introduce us to philosophy.
Yeah, right. It was a lecture course for I think first semesters in Germany. And Ivo mentioned it in one of his dialogues with Johannes, where Heidegger talks very explicitly of holding or countenance. It's the same word in German. maybe there's so countenance or holding.
Yeah.
So I think this is usually translated as comportment, something like that.
Yeah.
So and Heidegger in this lecture course brings up the example of a chalk. And he says, okay, when let's say before anything happens, before I make any let's say predicative explanations about the chalk, or I start investigating the chalk, before all of that, I have to let it be. It's the first thing I need to learn. Let it just be there. And right, that's the first thing I need to learn. And think about this is, I think, a particularly good example. This is right. This is an origami crane.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And these things are so delicate that that I usually, right, you can only, right, you need to learn, really need to learn to hold them and have a certain. So this is really, right, this is really embodied Dasein, let's say. You need to, right, I can't do this. Yeah. I can't be wild, let's say, right? Yeah. It can't be like maybe, right, a child that is maybe very energetic or so, just tries to I don't know. So there's a certain finesse that's going on. I can't if I would hold it a little bit more, let's say, with a firm hand, yeah, it would crunch. But then this little thing wouldn't be there any longer. So there's really and you really need to learn a certain conformity, right, with that particular thing, because there are so many ways in which this would not could not show forth in its suchness by my action. And this also tells us all about the role of the human being in knowing the world.
That I'm so glad that you brought that out, because that just I really got sense of that this attuning relationship, this letting, like as you said, the first thing we got to learn is how to let it be, right? You may hear the articulation of silence going on in the background, right? That is a new being that's about 2 months, a little over 2 months old. So the Native Americans, I thought this was great. I was like, what a great reframe. Like what they used to say is during their rituals or their ceremonies, when everyone had to be quiet, they said, by the way, we considered the sounds of children as the articulation of silence. I was like, oh, that just handles so many things right there. Right? There's so many things right there. So I invite all of us just to enjoy the articulating silence as it goes on through the rest of the video. But yeah, that kind of, what I like that in some sense, what I have in view, such that the world shows up for me in such a way where just the natural response is this letting be relationship, this open hand, right? Such that I'm attuned. Yes, I think what I'm attuned to is the Eidos, right? There's a way that's, I don't see the Eidos in any of the aspects. They're not a sensory perception, yet it's what I am precisely in relationship with. And in that sense, this is where this is where I can feel the attunement part, right? Is I connect to its form, right? But what's also happening is I'm being informed, right? I am forming, right, in this connection with this form, such that I naturally just respond in such a way that it's a letting be relationship, an open hand.
Right. I think that's why in this lecture course, right? Heidegger also talks about praxis, so practice, right?
Yeah.
And right, what we just described is it's not, let's say, in a usual sense how we think about a theoretical, right, attunement, right? Because otherwise, right, usually, right, we do this with concepts. This was what I tried to lay out before. But the first thing what we do is a very embodied attunement, right? You don't when you have a baby, when you have a young child, you don't want to say, oh, I'm now trying to understand this little thing with concepts.
Right.
Kind of.
Totally. Yes.
But the first thing you do is, right, you learn to hold yourself to this thing, and then, right, there's a co-holding, so to say. So you hold it, and it then holds you, because, right, agape is always reciprocal in this.
Yeah.
And right, so doing also this lightening, right, is also then, right, the atmosphere becomes light, everything becomes right. There is a certain, when you have a certain finesse with something, right, everything becomes light and playful. That's right, that's the word I was looking for. Everything becomes playful, easy. But it's right, it's a very serious playfulness when you play with a child, for example, You know that, right? Everything's on, everything, literally everything is at stake, right? When you play with a child.
Yeah.
But in a sense, you also try to lighten it and make it easy. But the main point is, right, that this is a very embodied knowledge that we have to learn. So even, let's say you go to circling as an example, right? You don't want to slack off like this.
Right.
And you also don't want to, you don't want to maybe be overly serious, let's say, or like you're in a tension all the time, let's say. So, and maybe even when you're nervous, right, or introverted, like I can't talk. But right, we need to cultivate a certain holding, certain countenance that also is inviting the other, so we can share an arena together. And this is the same thing I would say that Heidegger tried to describe with the chalk. At first, the chalk needs to be invited into my arena, so we can have a co-created arena together, a field on which we are both participating. And right, what we in modernity, right, what we often fail to do is when we have a brutal, or let's say an overly subjective way of conforming to the world, then this transjective dimension is just collapsing, and then beings turn their face, and then ultimately reality also turns its face away. And then, right, in sense, and these things are meaning that they are all going away.
Yeah. So what it's really interesting to think about this. So this is I wrote this down somewhere, but it's the way Ponte talking about the body, right? Like this is something that I can tell your attention's on right now, is this, in what way is this embodied, and what does the body have to do with this? And it's so interesting because everything that we're talking about, we're not talking about giving ourselves instructions in our head that then we do. No, it's at the silent level, and it's at the sense of addressing and being addressed in an appropriate way. And that appropriateness, right, has so many different levels of attunement going on, right? But you're right. This kind of sense of this optimal. Well, this is the Ponte's notion of the optimal grip, right? We know when we're in public, like we know, like what's standing too far back, right? What's too far close. We're always finding that place, right? And our body's already intelligently orienting itself in that regard. Like in fact, they've tried to do studies of this, right? And break down the rules that they're like the analytical philosophy way of trying to break down rules about how they know and measuring. And they found out that there is none, right? There aren't any. Like no one knows exactly, and they're not exact, and it's an attunement relationship that's one finds oneself already underway in, right? And so that's the important part about this, is I think, is to get the embodied sense of it, the embedded sense of this, is to notice that our body is already inhabiting and being inhabited by the world in that kind of that way, right? And so what we're kind of, to keep this thread, and that which our body is attuned to in some sense, right? Because there's the ear measurability of the form, right? The form is precisely the thing that you don't see. You you see in some way it's gathering all the aspects to make the thing be the thing that it is and give it its look, right? But that eidos, that form, that through line, isn't itself another aspect, right? So in some sense, what I'm hearing is that like our body has a very intimate relationship with the eidos, right?
Mm.
Like there's some kind of, it'd be interesting to think about the eidos of the body, right? And the eidos of the thing or the world or the person, and how that they aspectualize and find their right relationship to each other. And the geometry of that must be really, well, stunning just to think about and talk about right now, right?
And right, that point that you just make, that's a really important point that distinguishes, for example, someone like Nishitani or the Kyoto School or Heidegger from, let's say, science in general, right? Because in science, right, we think, right, that, I mean, when you say that, yeah, the comportment of your body is important for all of this.
Yeah.
But this is usually, we don't want to hear that, because it shouldn't matter, right? It should be an intersubjectively valid knowledge,
Yeah,
that is true, no matter how I hold myself in the world.
yeah,
So that what we are invoking here is a very, right, it's this ancient way of knowing, where the praxis, the practice, is very intimately, as you explained so well before, right, is intimately coupled to how we perceive a thing. And depending on how good we are doing this holding, we either see the form or we don't, right? Or we just see a total, maybe we just see aspects.
Yeah.
And the danger, right, that Heidegger, for example, again brings up in his dialogue with the Japanese, was that, right, and concepts give us, however, the illusion that we are in full grasp of this whole thing, of this whole concept, let's say. And then again, right, when you just operate with concepts, like the body is irrelevant, right? It doesn't matter like how the body is involved in all of this, because with concepts, or like that's all less important.
Yeah.
But there is again, there's especially, right, when you think about maybe the example I brought up, when you don't have the right finesse, the right skillfulness, the right faithfulness also, then you can't have a right relationship. You can't appreciate art, right? That's what we said before, right? And then you think, okay, why do we need art? What's this all good for? Like,
right.
And then this is what Nietzsche bemoaned so much. Then we become incapable of appreciating art, and the whole culture is becoming lower, because those inexhaustible mourners trans aspects, they withdraw, they go away.
Yeah.
And then, right, then beauty and those things then also disappear from the world. That's also then happened.
Right. And what we're talking about, this attuned comportment in which we let be, right? We let all the aspects be all of the aspects, right? In this attuned relation, right? it's interesting. Yeah, this is it's just so interesting. I'm just kind of really kind of appreciating the pre-reflective level that's going on, right? And appreciating like just, I mean, this is thousands upon thousands of years of customs and social practices and all of that kind of stuff, right? Which we're not even aware that we're doing. We don't have to be aware of it, right? The body is just already underway in that relation, right? And in fact, if you go to a friend of mine, uh, Jeff, he's this ADD kind of spazzy, clumsy guy, anyways. Goes with his wife to Japan. His wife is Japanese, and she talked about, yeah, when they had dinner for the first time together with the family, you know, there's a whole ritual the way that they eat, right? It's like pass to the left, and there's this whole thing, and then Jeff like needed a fork or something, and he just gets up and like and goes and grabs it. And she said the horror, right, that was on everyone's face at the table, like, oh my God, what did he just do, right? And this is something else I just want to kind of talk about, the outline. You kind of get the outline of these embodied customs, right? These, right, these lived customs that in some way, what it's interesting because we used to get at this, highlight this by going out. In fact, we had a course that was on wholeness, right? And in the way that we conceptualized it was that like the opposite of wholeness is shame, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so wholeness being something like the Gestaltian sense that fundamentally you're good, right? Things are whole, right? And that wholeness organizes everything, right? And that organization reflects back that wholeness. And shame is something like, at least in the way that we were talking about it, shame is something like a fundamental inadequacy, or a felt sense of a fundamental wrongness, right, of being, was just shame. And how we would get at that, right, was we'd have people go and explore social shame. So we would go and do these crazy things where we'd go and circle and like in the middle of the BART station, right? Like people stand in the center and they circle, and we have them do all these strange things as people are walking by. We're like have them yell as loud as they can and laugh on the train uncontrollably. And I would always hate those exercises. I would hate them because it was like there was this, oh God, you just felt like you were just doing the worst thing possible. And everyone was just like horrified. But what was really interesting is I remember one moment where I'm like trying to laugh on the train, right? And this woman's looking at me like I am just the worst thing in the world. And I'm like, I can barely, and at some point I broke some sound barrier. I freed myself, or I had this momentary freedom from all of those kind of social constraints. And I got off the train. I remember I felt like 1,000 miles wide, right? So, but what, and this is not exactly what we're talking about here, but there's, I think I bring this up. What this kind of reveals is that there's ways that I can appropriate, right? Which are more like, I'm doing what I'm doing because that's what people do, or I'm doing what I'm doing because that's what I've always been doing, right? There's a way where someone can fall asleep in these relations, right? But I think what we're talking about is bringing something else to the picture, right? Of that there's a sense of a comportment that isn't just on automatic pilot, right? But in some sense, one is aware that there is a call and response going on. There's an address and being addressed going on, right, with this. And that there's a way that Heidegger is inviting us to first open the hands to the whole thing and let it be without, but there's that can be very alive, right? That can be very, very alive. But there's also a way in which that can be just like automatic, right? You're just being polite because that's what people do or something like that, right? But one of the things I have found as I've gotten older is appreciate, like, actually, if you just notice all of the social customs, right? And the distance between each other and how we know to say hi or not, like all of these kinds of things, there's so much of that going on, right? And you think about most of that is just invisible to us. We're inside of it. But when you start to pay attention to it, you see, it's intelligibility. You're seeing intelligibility, right? In that sense. And there's a respectful relationship that you can have for that. Big time.
I think, okay, what comes up? Like, well, shame is an important feature, right? The shame is something like either it's right your wholeness, which is beyond all the possible aspects. So right, the gestalt is beyond all the parts. The whole, right? The whole is beyond all the parts. And shame is either something like either that whole is discredited as such, right? It's not accepted, right? It's like you've failed. So you're
on trial. You're in a courtroom.
Yeah. Or right, it's maybe shame is also something, right? When I think about it, right, it's something like this wholeness is collapsed into a few particular aspects, which then which are then hyper salient for the group. So right, this like, I don't know, you do something I don't know, really stupid, and everyone sees it, and then you feel shame because, right, suddenly this wholeness of you has collapsed in that particular aspect of yourself that now everyone sees, and and identifies you just with that. And why we hate this, right? When you do something that you don't want to do, and then the group reduces that co-conformity to you, to that thing that you did, whatever that is.
Totally.
Right, and things like sin could be, right, when you do, especially, right, when you I don't know, you commit, what is in Japan, what should not, what is usually what they don't like. Let's say you have an affair or so, and right, it comes up, and then right, then your whole being is reduced to that.
Yes. Yeah.
That, just that.
Only that.
And
yep.
And that's then maybe something like shame. And then, right, what then we could learn is again releasement. So we let be, so that then this thing, let's say this shameful individual, can again just be there, and then it itself, right, the being itself, can discover its own moreness also. But it also, right, then there's always the invitation, there's always the arenic aspect of this, so we can also participate in educing the moreness.
Yeah, totally.
Um,
Totally. And it's so interesting because this, in fact, you could say that, and I've noticed this with working with my clients over the years, right? Because there's those social boundaries, right? Like if you go outside of them, right? Like if you could, if I tell you to go lay on, like I was talking about before, if I say, go to Starbucks and just lay on the floor, right? It just imagines like what you can just imagine that immediately, like, how could I? I can't do that. And if you did, and you're just laying on the floor, everyone would be like, what is he doing? Like it's you, and what you reveal that, like, and this is if you didn't have that shame as an affect, you wouldn't be able to function as a society, right? It's like you're living inside of these boundaries or these shapes, right? And some of them work, but boy, when they get pernicious, right? When they be, as you're talking about, is right when, especially in that talking about people, I can't tell you how many people I've worked with that when it came down to it, um, that these defining moments, right, were these moments of this huge break. It's like almost like a break in belonging or a break in like some kind of shock in the realization of separation or something like that. And it's usually something in some kind of humiliating situation in grade school, or you grew up in a school and then you moved, right? And then you were plopped into a new, and you didn't know how to do it. And you had to hide all these things and figure out how to survive. And then you were humiliated. And then what's interesting is that if that goes really deep, you just start to live inside of that shape to make sure that never happens again, right? And so how you do it, some of the ways that you do it is you just never go close to that. And then that never going close to that starts to be the shape that you take. So when you start working with people and they start going really being who they are and making commitments and goals and aspirations to then open up, guarantee, and almost every single person that I've worked with, pretty much, it's usually, it's not the external obstacles that are the challenge, right? It's really these internal obstacles, because oftentimes your authenticity is on the other side of this kind of shame shape that you maybe take, right? So the process of, and this is the big difference, right? This is the big difference between exposure and vulnerability, and where we can start to, argue that maybe vulnerability in the way I'm talking about is actually a virtue, whereas, right, like the traumatic, these traumatizing things are these moments of exposure, right, where like there's no, I'm not wanting it, I'm not volunteering for it, I'm just exposed, right? Humiliation. So then they go, okay, on the way there, and they start hitting all these internal kind of blocks, right? And it can look all these different ways. But essentially what's going on is, like, as they work through it, right, where that barrier becomes the point of connection versus the point of separation, right? That's the whole thing. It's usually them having to walk through feelings of embarrassment and humiliation and, like, awkwardness. And as they can begin to tolerate and volunteer to go into those things, that is the process of them fulfilling the thing that they've wanted. And it's also the process of freeing themselves in some sense from their own shame shape, if you will. Right?
Shame shape is a wonderful.
Isn't that a great word? Yeah.
That's a good word. So now let's maybe bring this back to eidetic eduction.
Yeah.
So, right, I would say we have to assume that in eidetic eduction, the being that we are reducing, right? Being again a water glass cannot tell you like I'm vulnerable, cannot scream out to the but we have to assume, right, that all beings are also vulnerable, right?
Yeah. And so the same thing that you described, right? We can also have the same thinking about like beings, inanimate beings. And just like when let's say a human being is shame-shaped, collapsed into like the most horrible, the most shameful aspects of oneself, where we can also collapse a being, right, into just aspects. This is what I want to talk with John. What we do so carelessly today, right? When we say, "Oh, this is just atoms," or there's a line in Nishitani where he says something like, kind of like something what he has in mind, or let me. I read this quite long ago, but he says, right, the thing, the kind of, right, the kind of field that he has in mind is where we don't say, for example, a flower has a soul, or a human being is just the I don't know, the blood cells and the atoms. So just material, just this assembly of organs and parts. We don't elevate the being into, right, but we don't collapse it down, but we just let it be, and then its selfness for its own sake comes to the fore. We don't make it idealistic, or we don't collapse it to just a reductionistic point. This is this anontological thing that I want to describe. So all reifications are refused by the being, and right, a shame shape is, let's say, that's also reification, right? That's also reification, because I said, wait, this is just the guy who is, I don't know, who did this in the past, and now we have to reduce him to that. Right, a trauma, right? This is often a trauma, something, right? I mean, like a wound, right? When you're vulnerable, right? You have a wound, and then you're reduced to that wound that you suffered. Whether you self did it or it happened to you, this doesn't matter for shame. This is the horrible aspect of it. Sometimes, right, you can be faulted, but sometimes, right, it's the environment who does something to you, and then you're ashamed. But so eidetic deduction, right, is this. We have to invite also and be aware, as I would say, of all our vulnerability, right, and how fragile that whole process, I would say, is, and how quickly this could dissolve or collapse, right? When you're in a therapy practice, and you then let's say you're inattentive for brief, for let's say a minute or so, and then the client says something, and then you didn't catch it, right? Then the client feels also not accepted in it, right? And then you fail, right? Then when you let go of your countenance, then you invite again that the mourners withdraws, and so that's why Heidegger, right? This is what Ivo says so wonderfully, right? Writing for 10 hours a day and being in the gym all the time, so we can. So it's a continual practice. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
a very difficult one, right?
Yeah. There's moments where like you can hear you can hear the W on the wholeness like fall off the word crash, and you're just with HOLE.
Mm. Mm.
You can hear that all the time. Yeah. Totally. So this is really interesting. So I had no idea that we were going to kind of go into this, but this is interesting to kind of think about this, that there's something about shame, right? And vulnerability versus exposure, and contact with and attunement with the Eidos, right? With the look of things, right? Which are, I'm seeing this relationship that I've never quite seen together before. That there's a way where it's interesting to think about it. Like if I am kind of bound into a shame shape, right? Well, one, I'm already defended, right? Like, I mean, definitely people have ways of being, and definitely people can have defensive ways of being. I'm already guarded for something, this, that, or the other thing, right? And in that sense, these preoccupations, right, with, like, some people are preoccupied with safety, some people are preoccupied with, like orderliness, some people are whatever, or like preoccupied with like being betrayed, or something like that. And what's interesting about those preoccupations is that I would imagine what they do is they're ways of imposing, right, on the world, right? That's that I see your behavior in terms of that, right? I see things and then therefore I respond to those things in those ways, and it ends up being a self-fulfilling prophecy. But I think what we're talking about is that there's a way in which to be in contact with the Eidos, right, is actually kind of a certain sense where you're recognizing something, but what you recognize is ambiguous. But they're just like when you see somebody's, like, I think this is what it is, like when you recognize another's face, right? There's something like all of a sudden, oh, you recognize there's you, but then I'm drawn in, right, to have a genuine encounter. And an encounter has this element of one, an encounter has a sense of, there's a recognition that draws you into it. And what draws you in is, and what you recognize at the same time, is it draws you in to resolve what is obscure, right? So it's like a recognition, but an opening to kind of lean in like you do another person and hear what they have to say, right? That sense, right? And I think that recognition is something like what you're recognizing is that through line, right? However, in something like when you're imposing, right, your preoccupations on the world, all I am is checking for aspects that are like things like that, and it's more like a connect the dots versus a letting unfold. Huh.
Mm.
Wow, this is,
And
I've
right
never
then,
quite put all this together in this way before. This is really singing.
right when you're leaning in, let's say into the more,
Yeah.
when you try to recognize it, right? Again, there's always a danger, right? This is what we talk about. That you could potentially hear something very horrible,
Yeah.
something that overwhelms you, right? Something that so then, but that's why also, again, this holding is so important.
Yeah.
Because let's say when we talked before this record, we talked about a dramaturgical performance. But right, what you could have in a performance is, right, that when, let's say, something like, say, the plot is, let's say, it's reaching its culmination, its apex.
Yeah.
And then at this point that something happens, And then we are overwhelmed.
Right.
We're so this is right. This is always so when we're leaning in, right?
Yeah.
Also, again, I told you once in tea ceremony that there are these, right? And sometimes there are these people, and for first time they feel now they are recognized.
Yeah.
Now they are just minded as they are, and then, right, they start tearing up because now they can be vulnerable, and they can show it, right? And
Yes.
And I'm sure in circling, I mean, just right in the
it's like a temple of that.
Yeah. But right, all of these things, let's say, right, they are examples of, let's say, an eidetic eduction, right? Because right, what we're doing in all these things is by having the through line as our guide and being oriented towards the good.
Yeah.
Then and right then these more aspects, then when they come to the fore, well, right, that maybe we can talk even about this, right? The self, the Jungian, right? The capital S self, or the divine double, right? These aspects that are usually then undisclosed when we are just shame-shaped.
Yeah.
Right? Then there's no divine double anymore. There's no divine person that's shining above you. Because then you just collapse to the worst aspects of you. Right. And what then comes to the foreign eidetic education, when we just speaking in the realm of persons, are then, right, like glimpses of that moreness, right, which John called the divine double, or Jung called the self, right?
Yeah.
And then, right, then the archetype, let's say the archetype is present.
Something like I'm getting a sense of it as you're talking about is something like the divine double is something like the origin that's always arriving first and giving sense and direction and normativity to what's happening now. Then this is why I think for me, it's like when I move towards some possibility or vision I see in the future, and I start realizing it, right, and moving towards it, I always have this sense that, like, actually, on one level, I'm creating something, but the experience really is more like something is being disclosed that was already there in some way, like the telos, right? In some ways we're co-revealing each other, right? And it shows up as maybe a goal I can write down on a piece of paper at first, but that was just like maybe the tip of the nose of the right. And as you start to get in this relationship, your future becomes realized in a very similar way of like, a person, right?
It's right, that's weird. And in dialogos, my experience is, right, we don't have a goal when we enter it.
Right.
We don't know what will happen. Right. It's more that we have this normative horizon in front of you, and the good is, right, the potential then shapes itself. So it's autotelic in important ways. It makes it like we don't really have a fixed goal.
Yeah.
But we have a large possibility space of ways we can realize the moreness.
It's almost like there's a comportment to hear the whisper of what's giving direction, or what wants to happen, or what wants to emerge, right? Yeah, there's an openness to that being the case and hearing it, right, as it goes on. Yeah, very much so. So how about we go back? Let's actually go back and listen to the John kind of describe this some more. How's that sound?
Good.
Good. Okay. All right. So I'll pull it back up. All right. Here we go.
Israel says something very similar. He says, right, although you can never, right, you don't have this, nevertheless, within your phenomenology, we have to be really careful here about how we're using that term, because it is within your phenomenology, but it's not a direct perceptible object. You nevertheless perceive the object, right? And it was like, and it just sort of hit me like, oh, right, somehow out of, right, this multi-aspectuality, this inexhaustible multi-aspectuality does not unfold chaotically. It does not unfold. It has a through line to it. It is relentlessly intelligible. Somehow, and they are not identical in terms of their content. All these aspects belong together. They somehow share a non-logical identity with each other. I call this like the through line. And I was thinking, oh, and that I think is a better model of what Plato means by the form. And
by the way, it looked at in terms of the body, the most relentless. He talked about a relentless intelligibility, right? The most relentless aspect of the body has got to be the heart. Like it is determined to pump. There's like the symbol of it, but also literally, right? The pumping heart is the most relentless thing going on. And so there's this, so just this connection of, this place where in some sense, what hears the Eidos, right? What's already attuned with the Eidos is something like the heart, right? Something like the heart.
I was thinking, and that also would bind us back into the conformity theory of knowing, because and this is kind of a Harmon twist on Kant. The through line of this object is bound up with the through line of me. I am also multi-aspectual as I am picking up on all the aspects. So the through line of the eidos of the thing is akin, to use Plato's language, to the through line within me. And that me, and this of course Hume made famous in a negative fashion, is not anything I ever observe, but nevertheless it is a proper part of the phenomenology of the self, because the self is experienced as something that is bound together in a non-logical way, and we try and capture that with narrative. So here's the two points, right? That which binds all these aspects together is not itself an aspect. That which binds all of me together is not another me. And those two are bound together in a dialogical wedding whenever I am trying to make intelligible anything. And I think that is much closer to what Plato is trying to disclose when he's talking about the eidos and the kinship between the suke, the soul, and the eidos. And it's by bringing this back into a phenomenological experience and something one can practice, I'm trying to revitalize the Platonic theory of the forms. Sorry, that was a lot, but I needed to say sort of that whole argument to get it out there.
Did you want to say something, Dan? I just saw you like make very animated faces. Like, anything you want to say?
No. I mean, we could we could continue listening.
Yeah, let's get.
Let me. Okay, I thought a little bit about it. And I might work a little bit now with J.P. Marceau's kind of like his model that he laid out.
Yeah.
so let's say the aspects emerge from the bottom.
Yes.
And from the ground of, he would say, non-being, the nihilum, or emptiness or so.
Yeah, yep.
So the aspects emerge, and kind of like, so you say there's this, all the aspects, all let's say the characteristics of the whatness of an object, of myself, form a non-logical identity that isn't in itself higher, that is also kind of like a no thing. There's not an aspect in itself.
Yes,
but
exactly.
not even something, nothing else, something.
Yes.
And I think, right, we could maybe say this is now maybe the Geist or something like that.
Yes.
It's a kind of like, it's a third kind. Maybe we can use that language. Even this is an insight from Nishida, who was very also interested in kind of like in Plato. He thought that there is, right, there's being and non-being, and they always oscillate between each other in the chora.
Yeah.
Which was then this kind of like the centerpiece in Nishida's ontology, was this receptacle, the place.
The chora.
It kind of like in what Plato called it triton genos, a third kind, something ontologically different from all the other things.
Yes.
And I sometimes think this comes to your relevance realization in any kind of, anyways. So
no, that's directly right. I think let's come back to that, because the process of relevance realization, I think, I don't want to say it's reflected, because I'm not trying to speak like a form of Berkeleyan idealism, but there's a mirroring of the way relevance realization is unfolding in a way in which eidetic eduction is disclosing. Yes, I think that's important. But please continue.
So
okay, and
so just real quick. So the relevance realization and the eidetic deduction. So we're talking about the aspects, how the aspects and the eidos are mutually self-disclosing. Is that kind of what he's getting at?
Yeah, and that, right, but none of them, right, is absolute.
Yeah.
They're held by a certain arena that lets this even, right, that lets this be.
There's a holding again. Yeah.
Yeah, so right, this is what I said in the beginning. I think this arenic aspect of the whole thing, again, that's why Nishitani makes this, right? I mean, the clearest example of this is, again, where he says at the very end of Religion and Nothingness, is that that's his interpretation of making the cross.
Yeah.
What is this? Is it's in the cross we form a field on which then any being can be agapically encountered in its suchness as it is. So for him, right, this has a very spatial aspect, and that again, this arena is, in a sense, right, we talked about God as the eternal field of intelligibility with Gregory of Nyssa. This was a little bit later then. So, and this field is informing that process of eidetic deduction. So there's almost, right, from the field, they're going through lines to all the to me, but also, right, that John said in the beginning, to the knife, and then to all the other things that they are. And then it's was said before, it's kind of like, then we come to something like God or so.
Yeah.
Just the through line, right? The through line is like, it can never be. It doesn't have an end.
Yeah.
But it's inexhaustible.
Yeah.
And also at the same, right, it's not just one line, I guess. It's like a gathering of lines.
Yeah. Right. And maybe there's that element of too, there's that element when something comes into being, when you have an insight, or when you learn a language, there is something irreversible in those things, right? Where you can no longer, once you learn a language, you can't ever just hear the sound again, right? There's a way where there is something irreversible that goes on where, in some sense, the language, if you think about it like this, it's like, well, you do hear the sound, you know it's a language, so it's got some kind of eidos just in that, but when you learn the language, that becomes something that sound says, right? And that becomes irreversible, right? And I know John's playing with this idea right now, and I think it's really good, this sense of like, well, I have a sense of that irreversibility of when kind of content or form or aspect and eidos come together in that way, and it's irreversible. That's something like what we mean by reality.
Yeah, right. When Parmenides declares that being and thinking are the same.
Yeah.
The problem is, since then, there was also, right, in Parmenides, you also have this, there's a need or a stress that this sameness of being and thinking can collapse.
Yeah.
And philosophically speaking, that's nihilism.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because then, right, if that collapses, then your thinking would be just subjective.
Yeah.
But everything is unreal.
Yeah. Yeah.
Don't know anything, like, because thinking is not bound up with being.
Yeah.
That means that then being is unintelligible.
Yeah.
And then reality collapses, right? So if there is something intelligibilized, then you have the danger that this can collapse again.
Yeah.
That's, I think, what you said with the language, right? So,
right.
And that's why that's what we ideally don't want. This right, these are then traumatic experience, right? And
yeah, totally.
When something that is right, this is when right, you have a relationship and you think, right, it's established, and you think there's a co-conforming in that.
Yeah.
And right when it collapses, then that's of course the greatest trauma, because then that connection of intelligibility is now right. And we say this even, right? I don't know you anymore. I don't know who you are.
Yeah.
Right, and then there's a kind of, right, there's a kind of, and philosophically speaking, kind of like metaphysical nihilism is when you say, I don't know who you are to the whole of reality.
Yeah.
which is the greatest horror imaginable.
Right. And then you have to decide, like, which one do I kill? Do I kill them or do I kill me? Right. That's the next conversation, right? Yeah. Totally.
Guy, I would like to go, because I have another conversation in 15 minutes.
Oh wow, you're a heavy day today.
What?
it's a heavy talk day for you.
Yeah.
Let's continue this. I actually like going through the video like this and kind of pulling things out like this. Has been really great.
Sure. Yeah, it was really good. Also great meeting Chris before.
Yeah,
that was also really nice.
Such a good.
Also, yeah. I'm done.
Any last things?
I have an off record question.
Okay, cool. All right. Okay, I'll stop. Okay.